So I actually said that I was going to tackle this Dawkins and Jordan Petersen interview. It's like an hour and a half long. I haven't got around to watching it yet, but I noticed it a few days ago, and I thought, right, that'll be something interesting to comment on. I've spoken about Dawkins before, and I've listened to what he has to say. This piece here,
things that science can do.
This is a short 14-minute kind of like teaser from their interview. It looks like they're both discussing or debating about religion, and they've got a mediator there, a young English lad, academic, who is kind of basically refereeing or mediating their debate. I just listened to this 14-minute excerpt, and there's a few things to actually say about it. Quite a lot to say about it. And then I noticed they did a discussion.
There's a really interesting Chinese image.
They did a talk about, it's called Psychedelics and Consciousness and AI. That's an hour and a half. I just listened to parts of it, and I didn't hear anything really about psychedelics in it, to be honest. But there was actually a few things that I wanted to comment on. But I'm thinking that I'm going to comment on this 40-minute section first, because there's a lot of actual things I've been thinking about Christianity and the whole religion, which has updated my view on it all. One interest, you know what, I'll just say at this minute. When I was listening to the psychedelic discussion, I just listened to a little piece out of it. And Jordan Petersen asked a question to Dawkins. He said, "Are you interested in ideas or aesthetics?" And Dawkins responded that he was more interested in ideas than aesthetics, right? Now, I find that quite interesting, because Dawkins is meant to be interested in facts, right? Fact. And science, science is fact, and you can get results from science. You can apply science to things and get a result or a outcome, or a predictable outcome, like obviously building a helicopter and making it fly, right? Now, this is where I think that these two guys really break the crust, really. To be honest, I think both of them, similar to Russell Brand, you're supposed to use language to help clarify what you're saying, but these guys, there's a lot of unnecessary language and a lot of excessive language, overuse of the dictionary, unnecessary use of the dictionary, almost artistic flamboyance, which is not actually clarifying anything. And it's as bad as when I am talking about a subject and then I go off topic and or I go on a tangent, a branch, and then I forget that I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on that branch, and then come back and then continue with the rest of the tree explanation, basically. What I find with these guys is the way they discuss things is when they're talking about something, they extend it to an unnecessary length. If you think how you paint something and draw something, if you're going to draw, if you want to paint a picture or draw a mental image of something, you describe all the different aspects of it. And this is why when you're talking about something to describe it, you might end up going on a branch or tangent and then work on that part of the description. And then if you work on that part of the description for too long, you actually left the main path, and then you have to go back to it. And then these guys what they do is, in my opinion, when they add all these vocabulary words in and expressions, they're claiming they're trying to make what they're saying more detailed and intricate so they can describe it more, but they don't add any intricacy or clarity to the picture that is being painted. What they do is they add unnecessary and extensive descriptions into something that can be simply stated and added to the diagram quite simply, right? And instead what they tend to do is it's almost kind of like expand, if you expand some kind of extraordinary, they go to extraordinary lengths to explain something which is it turns out to be quite simple, right? And therefore, they add unnecessary lengths into their description, which doesn't actually help to make the diagram any more defined or intricate or well communicated. Whereas what I do is I add a lot of intricacy to the diagram, but I end up not drawing the whole diagram evenly. I go off to one side, and then I do part of it extensively, and then I forget to come back and do the rest of it a lot of times. There are some very different ways that people have got of communicating and expressing things and actually what they're focusing on, But anyway, when Dawkins, let's try to get back to Dawkins. So when Dawkins says that he's more interested in ideas than aesthetics, I find that quite silly, and I don't think that it's true, because he's a person of fact. He said he's a person of fact and science. Now, fact comes from things. Fact comes from picking something up and measuring it, picking something up and looking at it, picking something up and observing it, inspecting it, right? Testing it. Now, that's aesthetics, because it's, if you pick up a DVD, if you are going to scientifically objectify a DVD box, the DVD box is an object in front of you. It exists. It has sides, faces, dimensions. It has a measurement. It has a colour. It has a property. It has a substance. All these things are the aesthetics of the object, and in order to scientifically measure and categorize it, it's all aesthetic. It is the DVD box that exists, is to observe, measure, and quantify it, right? Nothing of the DVD box is an idea. It is a physical thing which exists, so therefore you are interested in its aesthetics, in its presence in front of you and what it is, right? Now, the idea, there is no idea until you have one. There's nothing there. Until you have an idea, there is nothing, right? And you can have an idea that is not real, that does not exist. You can think of a goobajoo or a quackakuka or a quonkaquinka or a pink giraffe. All those things were just ideas, but none of them exist. So how you can be more interested in ideas which are subjective and come from nowhere, or can come from nowhere, right? Although most of those things, like the giraffe, actually comes from the outside. It's a combination of the aesthetics of two objects that exist, which were aesthetic. A giraffe and the colour pink combined together in an idea, but they come from aesthetic things. Whereas the goobajoo, or the googaluga, or the quankakukakika, they are not actually anything, because I just conjured them from nowhere. They're not based on any actual thing in the visible existing world. I just completely and utterly fabricated them from nowhere. They have no aesthetic. They have no fact. They have no measurement. They have no reality. They have nothing. I imagined them from nowhere. There was nothing, then they existed. Dawkins is not interested in things that don't exist, in fantasy, in pretend, in, fiction. He's interested in actual things that can be measured and that you can use, scientific, that exist. So how he can say that he's more interested in, Jordan Petersen said, aesthetic or idea. Well, Dawkins said idea, but he's a liar. He can't be interested in idea because idea is not scientific. And then what makes it worse is the scientist uses measurements, right? The scientist uses measurements and the scientist measures things, right? He's interested in what is the diameter, what is the radius, what is the length, how much does it weigh, right? What are its properties? How do you make a helicopter fly? Is it strong enough? What is the strength of it? How much does it weigh? What are the dynamics of the interaction between the blades and the air? Measure what happens when you spin them round. Do you feel some kind of lift? I've discovered gravity and lift. How can I make this move by itself? By making a motor, blah, 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 right? But to measure something, right, to calculate a surface area, you need measurements. You need a ruler, right? Now, the thing with Dawkins is this, right? Where do you get the measurements from? Well, actually, they don't exist. There is no such thing as a measurement. There is no such thing as a centimetre or a millimetre or an inch or a metre. It doesn't exist because in nature there are trees, there are pieces of wood, there are rocks, right? There are these objects. We're interested in their aesthetics, right? But there is no such thing as a measurement until, right, a human has an idea in his head and he says, okay, I'm going to draw along here increments at a spaced out distance, right? Like on the front of Newgrange, when you have a rock and you split it in, draw a line down the middle. When you make a mark in the centre of something, you have to find the centre. The centre doesn't find itself. Well, actually, in nature it does, like in a pine cone, there's a centre and there is a surrounding around it. But the pine cone, there are different size pine cones. It generally, it has a consistency, it has a form and uniform consistency and shape, but that happens naturally. It doesn't have a measurement because, you can say generally pine cones have generally spaces is going to be between this and that distance. You can have an average distance, you can have an average size, but they aren't all the exact same size, right? They're generally certain shapes and sizes, right? But the thing to actually have a precise fixed measurement, which is always the same, I mean, you could say like Giant's Causeway has got those, the hexagon shape or whatever they are, rocks, right? They crystallise. Crystals are more uniform, okay? And they generally have a size as well. But they still do not have a absolute, complete and total, they still have a general size. Man had an idea to make get materials, aesthetics, and modify aesthetics. So rather than being random and natural and general, even though they all obeyed laws of science, which, exist, but we didn't create or invent, right? But they just are. when you get a stick of a particular length of your choosing and your selection, there is no fixed. Sticks are all different lengths, right? Trees grow branches to infinite numbers of different lengths, right? Or not infinite, but, it can be any length, right? So, well, not absolutely any length, because there's a maximum size that a tree will grow to, but, it's, you choose a given length, right? And then you decide to you will find the center of it, right? But you choose the center, and you are applying a cognitive process, right, to weigh up the length of it, and then you put a mark on it in the middle. You find where the center is, but not generally exactly, right? And then you are actually, what you're actually doing is you're writing. You're actually recording and writing on it information. And this information, right, it actually doesn't, in nature of itself, happen without a human thinking and actually create. You actually are engaging in a creative process. In fact, you're actually creating something as much as something creates itself. A tree that is growing, right, and it is coming into existence, you actually are making something come into existence that previously was not there or did not exist, right? Even if it's based on fundamental principles, you're still making them come into existence, and that is actually an idea coming into being, into manifestation. But it and when you get to the stage where you actually are making something that there's no other example of it, right? There's no other actual example of it in existence on this planet, for example, then you make the very first one. You're the very first instance of a particular thing existing. So, for example, if you go back in time, and there's never ever been a cup, right? If you go back, to the dinosaurs or something when there's no humans around, and there isn't one single cup on the whole planet, right? If you make a cup, right, the cup's no cup is going to appear through the fundamental existing principles of scientific measurements and principles that form pine cones that grow in geometric or other principles of nature that grow around scientific processes around it, even if they can create geometric shapes which are quite uniform or follow certain follow certain chemical or scientific laws, which are not absolutely precise always, but general, right? A cup won't appear. It will not grow on a tree. It will not form from crystals, and it will not otherwise appear through any of the laws of science on this planet. No law of science on this planet, no matter how uniform crystals, rock formations, pine cones, or other such things, will make a cup appear, right? Only a man or woman can have an idea to contain water to make it easier to drink they will themselves put a handle on it to pick it up and hold it. Although you don't need a handle on it because you could just hold it in both hands or in one hand without a handle. But someone had the idea to do that because they thought of it, right? Now that's an idea, but the cup handle didn't exist, right? Before that, it was fiction. It was fiction fantasy, right? Now, the thing with Dawkins is that he's questioning all this religion, right? And saying, oh, well, did it happen? Did it happen? Is it fact? Is it fact? Fact. The thing is, right, a cup is fantasy until you make it happen, until you actually make it. It is pure folklore, fantasy, fiction, while you're talking about the idea, right? Now, whether it's possible, whether it's real, is only when you make it. But nature will not make it, right? You make it, and you're an instrument of nature, but it can only be through you as a channel. You know, make me a channel of your peace, right? Now, after you've made the cup, it has aesthetics, right? It has shape, form, length, substance, like anything else, like a pine cone or like a tree or a rock has aesthetics, right? But the cup was an idea, now it's an object with aesthetics, right? But where did it come from? It came from nowhere. It came from fiction, fantasy. Now, when Dawkins is asked, do you prefer aesthetics or ideas? He said ideas, right? So, but ideas come from, ideas, as I've explained, are from fantasy and fiction. Now, he professes that he doesn't like Christianity, he doesn't like religion, or the fact that some of it may be ideology or principles or exemplary or even notions or just parables or whatever. He said, I'm a man of science, I'm interested in science and fact and things that you can use. But the thing is, right, he didn't say that he was interested in aesthetics. Aesthetics are actual things that exist that you can measure, make and do things with. But he said he's interested in ideas. But he doesn't seem to be interested in the idea of Christianity. He wants to find objectivity and aesthetic of really Christianity. He wants the aesthetic of Christianity. But he said that he's interested in ideas. But he doesn't like the idea of Christianity and the idea that it could come from nowhere, a story or fiction, right? But he's trying to find the aesthetic of Christianity. But he said that he's interested more in ideas and not in aesthetics. When science is aesthetic, because you can't do science unless you measure things and are interested in objects and things that already actually exist and shapes. But you do apply a certain amount of ideas. And then the idea comes in when you have actually studied the aesthetics, then you can apply ideas to create new things that previously never existed. Now, what Dawkins does not like is that, there's a man and a woman, right? And they're walking around and you can have a religion. Well, where does a religion come from? Well, a religion does not exist. A religion is not a pine cone. A religion is not a rock. A religion is not a tree. A religion is not a blade of grass. A religion is not a crystal. A religion is not a rock formation. A religion is not the sun. A religion is not the ocean. A religion is not a fish, right? A religion can only come from the imagination of a person, just like increments on a ruler are drawings and markings from a human. So it's from the imagination of a human, like a ruler and a measure. So Dawkins, something that came from nowhere through the channel of a man or woman, right? He wants to try and find the objectivity of it and the actual aesthetic fact of something that could not have existed at all, because it can only come from a person and their mouth speaking and telling stories of accounts of things and ideas which are put onto a record in a book. No matter what book they are, they can't go on the page and be written down in letters and words and writing, just like the measurement on a ruler. So it's not objective. It didn't start from objectiveness. Now you might say, well, the descriptions and stories are of events and accounts that were objective, but in order to get on the paper, they filtered through a person and through a human being, right? So, and this is the thing. Unless the Bible was a pine cone, right, and grew itself, it's never going to be 100% objective in its existence or nature. It's part idea and part objective. Now, that's the same thing with a helicopter. A helicopter doesn't grow on a tree. It actually, part of it is an idea and came from somewhere. And I think that this, before we even get anywhere near this 16-minute conversation between them, let alone the entire an hour and a half video discussion, I think we've already got to Dawkins' dilemma, because you can't have anything which is existing only because of human activity that isn't part idea and part aesthetic. It's impossible unless it grew in a tree. And this is Dawkins' dilemma with the Bible. Part of it is clearly fantasy or fiction or story, and part of it is based on there was a man, there was a woman, there was a baby. Those are accounts of aesthetic things that objectively existed, right? And what you end up with is a story. But the book didn't grow in a tree. The book wasn't born out of fish eggs. It appeared on paper through a combination of realistic objective things and a human, right? So it's part fiction, part fact, or part aesthetic, part idea. And that's the thing with the helicopter. The helicopter is part idea and part aesthetic objective. And it's the actual helicopter itself is an idea. It's a thought that came from nowhere. Now, if Dawkins wants the science of how the helicopter exists, right, you might as well say this helicopter, right, is the virgin birth. Dawkins wants to know how it was possible that Jesus was born from a virgin woman who never had sex. It's not possible. But what he cannot understand is, how could the helicopter be born? Who gave birth to the helicopter? Did it grow on a tree? No. Did it come out of the back end of a fish in the water? No. Right? How can it exist then? Because a human mind gave birth to the helicopter. No fish had sex. no bird had sex or anything, right? It couldn't possibly exist without, it came from nowhere. Now, different elements brought it together, right? But it had to be formed by a human. But prior to that, it did not exist. Now, the thing with the Bible is a book sat on a rock is there. The book's there. But it didn't write itself. It didn't grow from anywhere. It was formed by a person, right? And this is the thing. Is the helicopter true? Is it real? Well, it's real because it actually exists. But the idea of the helicopter didn't exist until someone had it. And until, put it this way, right? Let's say there's two cavemen sat there with Dawkins, right? And one of them is trying to explain to Dawkins the helicopter, but Dawkins doesn't believe that helicopters exist, and he has no faith in them. And he tries to explain about flying, and Dawkins doesn't think that you can fly. And you try to make him, are you a believer? Well, if you say, well, if you do this and do that, and you spin this around really quick, then you'll take off. And you say, well, I don't believe you. And you explain to him in thorough explanation that this can happen. But where is it? It's a story, and Dawkins is not convinced. But you could go into the science of it, and you can measure things out, and you can tell him the law, the science behind it, and the basis behind it. But until you actually do it, it's not going to be there. Okay, you have to assemble it and put it together, right? But what is that principle to achieve, to make the helicopter? Now, the thing with the religion is, it's a set of instructions, right? You could say, well, hey, I've got an idea. Everyone could get along together and have a good time and stop arguing if we, follow these principles of Jesus, right? Depends what you want to achieve, right? If you want a helicopter to fly, then that, get the instructions out and do it. Let's say everyone were arguing and fighting, right? How can you get them all to behave and be good? Well, how about the Ten Commandments or, the 7 deadly sins? Well, let's work this religion out and let's say, get everyone to follow this. Well, what if they don't believe us? Well, we can convince them there's a science to it. If we all be nice and share things and be good, can you get them to do it? Or, well, I'll tell you what, if we all, make a helicopter, we can all go flying. This is the thing. And if everyone did follow those principles that you set out, then maybe they would all get along and so forth. But it's an idea, where's it come from? These are things. Now, as for this, virgin birth, that's a different thing to chew on and tackle. But we're just talking about aesthetics at this point. Aesthetics versus, ideas. And Dawkins said that, he's an idea person, but he isn't, because ideas are from nowhere and don't necessarily exist. They mainly are based on things that do exist, but a variation or combination of them. But some of them can be completely virgin or new and come from nowhere. But most scientists are not actually interested in ideas. They're interested in aesthetics, because aesthetics is the actual things that can be measured and looked at, observed and inspected, right? Which he wants to observe, inspect and objectify a religion. But the thing is, how do you inspect and objectify the helicopter when it doesn't exist yet, when you haven't made it? You actually, the concept of the helicopter, the idea of it, is but purely a thought, an imagination, right? So until it happens, this is it. And I don't think that Dawkins actually can come to terms with the fact that many things are a combination of something that no one ever thought of or didn't exist before. And this is the thing. It's like that with religions. It's part idea, right, and part objective fact. But it's not all objective fact. It's part fact and part idea. And, you can chew on it all you want. We could have many arguments and explanations and many more examples. But at the end of the day, right, the Bible is part fact and part idea, whether you like it or not. And that's tough. And I think what Petersen and Dawkins' main argument is that Dawkins wants the Bible, he wants to make all of it fact and confirm every single part of it to fact, or reality or aesthetic, when it can never be, because it's made from ideas and fact. And I think Dawkins cannot distinguish or identify idea from fact. And the thing with the helicopter, right, is that although the helicopter exists and is in front of Dawkins, he can touch it, but it's metal. And metal is an aesthetic and a thing, and it's objective, right? But the form of the helicopter, right? The form of the helicopter, the rudders, the blades, all the independent parts, the shape and form of the metal is formed and shaped of idea, right? And though the idea exists in front of him, the Bible exists in front of him. The words of the Bible exist in front of him. The story of the Bible, the story of Jesus, the story of Moses parting the water, the story, the objective part of it is the pages of the book, the paper, the writing, the scrolls of the letters, right? And the fact that, but the ideas in it now do exist on the pages, whether they happened or not, like the helicopter. Now, before the helicopter was imagined and built, where is the helicopter? Where is the helicopter? When no one had invented it, and when no one had thought of the helicopter, where is it? Where is it? And that's the thing with Dawkins. Where did it come from? It didn't grow in a tree, and it didn't come out of the ocean. It came from the mind of a human. Now, to find the virgin birth, to find out, how did Jesus come out of Mary without sex, is to find out how did the helicopter come out of your brain, right? But Dawkins knows that someone's brain had ideas in it and concepts of a helicopter, and then it was channeled through hands and built, right? Now, the Bible was channeled through some hands and written, okay? But before that, it didn't exist. Now, you can base it on, the helicopter's based on, animals can fly. You can have the idea of flying, and you can see that, some creatures and birds can fly. There's some of that in there to even conceive of flying. If no birds existed, if there wasn't any creatures called birds, if there wasn't any dinosaurs that flew, if there was no creature on this planet that flew, right, then maybe a human would never have thought of trying to fly or think of it. But then you can throw a rock through the air and see that it goes through the air and lands. So, you know, maybe you can think, well, I can throw a rock, I can throw a person and make a person fly if I was strong enough, right? Even though you'd never seen a bird fly before or thought of it, just from throwing a rock. But this is the thing, you know, where did, you know, but if you didn't have any arms, you couldn't throw a rock, you know, and you know, rocks can roll down cliffs and so forth, but never, it would be rare if a rock took off or threw it. You have, you know, it's, if there's no concept or other, to get an idea, you usually have to have like a foot up or a lift from another idea, right? I mean, you know, you could say then, oh, well, what happens if you pick it up in your teeth and, you know, throw your head from once, you know, just like get it between your teeth and then just like, or if, you know, you're shaking your head and then it accidentally flies off to the side and it goes through the air, that might be the first time that you've seen anything fly through the air. You know, if you just throw it with your mouth between your teeth. But this is the thing, unless you, but, you know, I think that the human brain and the imagination and the mind, the possibility to think of something, but you might not have had to see it before. This is the thing. But these conversations with Dawkins, I think it's mental masturbation. And I think really Dawkins and both Petersen as well are wind-up merchants. And I think that they're just looking for an argument. And they're looking for mental, they like whacking off on thoughts and ideas, but which they don't even understand properly. It's almost like an idea contest to try and beat the opponent. And really, there is no, you know, there's no answer, you know, to it. And particularly with the Bible, they're trying to prove this virgin birth thing, right? They're trying to prove, you know, did Mary actually have a child without having sex? But the thing is, no one knows, because the fact is, you can't prove it, because firstly, you can't ask any witnesses. It's like a court case, right? Even now in modern law, all you have to do is prove it beyond reasonable doubt in a court. If you can prove it beyond reasonable doubt to a jury, that's it. And how do you prove it? Through witness statements. Now, you might not have any fingerprints, you might not have a jacket with blood on it, you might not have any video footage, you might not have nothing. You might actually only in a court have 3 witnesses. Now, that is based on statements of human beings who swear they're going to tell the truth. It's based on their best memory, their best communication skills in language, and whether you trust them or not. It's not based on anything else. So immediately you've got no scientific measurement, proof, or anything in that courtroom. You don't have a ruler, you don't have a chemical analysis, you don't have any fingerprints, you don't have a video to look at with an image on it. You have nothing except 2 human beings with their best statement account. And that is all you need in a court of law beyond reasonable doubt. Mary and Joseph, did it happen? If it's proved in the court of law and a jury says so, then as far as in law, it happened. Now, the thing with the Bible is, right, firstly, we don't have the witnesses here now, and we're not going to have them. And the only account we've got now left is really in the Bible. So Dawkins wants to prove something. Firstly, he's trying to argue something that he's never going to prove, ever. It can never be proved only on reasonable doubt or not. Dawkins will never ever prove whether that happened or not, even if he tried, because the witnesses are not fucking here now, right? They're not here. The witnesses are here. They fucking died 2,000 years ago plus, right? And there aren't any written accounts. So Dawkins cannot prove it. Can't be proved or not. So he can argue all he wants. He can argue it all day, all night, all week, all year, right? He'll never prove it ever, because the witnesses are fucking dead, gone, right? 2,000 fucking years ago, right? Now, if you want to go to a court and see what a jury think, given the statements written down in the Bible, then that's up to 12 people to decide or not, right? But there is no fingerprints, there is no fucking photographs, there is no chemical analysis, sweet fuck all. He ain't gonna prove it, ever. Never. Because he hasn't got the witnesses, and even if they did, right, let's say that Mary and Joseph were there in front of him, right? In a courtroom, there's a jury of 12, and Dawkins is one of the jury of 12. Mary walks in, this is my child, I ain't had sex with anyone, is that the truth or not? Well, let's leave it to the professional, Mr. Dawkins. He's the fucking 12th juror, right? I mean, you could ask her a week after, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after, right? Is it beyond reasonable doubt or not? I'd like to know if Dawkins could even know whether or not it happened fucking 3 weeks later. You'd have to have been following it around, right? The best part of 12 months, right? Without taking your eyes off her for more than 5 minutes to absolutely prove it. Because she could have gone behind the building of anywhere and had a kid. Only she knows, right? Only she knows whether she did it or not. So, and that's the point of it. You can't I think that's one of the main points of the Bible. And to watch two guys whacking off mental masturbation over whether it happened or not is just joke. It's actually so childishly ridiculous that it is mental masturbation. These guys like whacking off on each other, and it's just ridiculous, you know? And I haven't even gone to the full 1.5 hour thing yet, but, you know, you can dismantle these guys to pieces, but by the time they've finished, you know, adding, you see, these guys are adding, you know, rather than just saying, you know, I had an idea, I had a very interesting idea. Oh, was it? Most ideas are interesting. How many ideas aren't interesting unless you're Homer Simpson, you know? Well, I had a novel and interesting idea the other day. Oh, did you? I had a very novel, interesting and entertaining idea the other day, which partook in entertaining it for about 7 minutes, and then after various divulgences and interludes along the way, then I ceased having that idea and moved on to a different idea. Oh, that's interesting, Jordan. I've got a few words in the back pocket of my vocabulary that I could throw out into that. I had a very novel, interesting and peculiar idea the other day that took up a rather 16 minutes of my time, and after I had decided whether or not we'd partake on that idea for another further 6 minutes, then I could fill you in with another bullshit and things I could possibly say. Just get to the fucking point. I had an idea the other day. Wow. Right, I could write a book about that. Could you? You know? What else happened? Well, you know, well, wouldn't you like to know? Well, we haven't even got to that yet. You know, wait till I finish telling you about my idea and how I had the idea. Well, I had the idea when I was bent over, when I was on my knees. And then I edged forward slightly onto my left ankle, and I felt a rather nulling twinge in my right arm. It was quite a peculiar feeling and rather tingly. And then I thought, this is rather strange. And then what I did is I slightly pulled my arm back 1/4 of an inch and 7 millimeters and lifted it up slightly to turn my arm round and see a rather darkish skin irregularity on my arm. I thought it was a little pimpleish looking, but it could have been a rash or an insect bite. Turned my arm round another 3 degrees. All right, so basically you bent over, lifted your arm up, and you thought you might have a rash on it, okay? You know, and, you know, well, where do you want to go with this story? You want to fill the details in, or are we going to actually go somewhere with this saga? You know, we could get to the part where I walked across the water. If I could ever get up from kneeling down, you know, what would you like me to focus on? You know, the cracks and crevices in my skin and how dried and warm they were after the beating sun was belting down, and the craquelia crevices on my skin was partaking to be somewhat reminiscent of a desert in April. But I'm more interested in the part of the story when we got to the beach and saw some seagulls. What kind of seagulls were they? Well, the type that you find at the seaside. Well, what do you want? What turns you on? What are you interested in? Well, I just like to mentally masturbate and whack myself off to loads of crazy, wacky ideas and see if I can take these two tennis players on with their, with their procrastinating contests. They didn't really get to a conclusion that was satisfactory for both parties, but they had a good bash at it. This is the thing with Dawkins and and Petersen. It's like, how long does it take paint to dry? Well, that depends. Could you describe to me the 10 minutes of paint drying? I could write a poem about paint drying as the paint is slowly drying and starting to lose its gloss as the coletus rise from the slowly opaque, it's like Danielson, paint all fence.